As President Donald Trump embarks on his second term, his administration is gearing up for significant changes to the U.S. Education Department, with plans to dismantle the agency and devolve education policy to the states. This controversial move, which Trump reiterated during a recent cabinet meeting, has left many state officials and lawmakers grappling with uncertainty about the future of educational governance in America. Trump's ambition to abolish the Education Department is not without precedent. Conservatives have long debated the merits of reducing the federal government's role in education, advocating for policies that would transfer key responsibilities, like funding and oversight, back to state governments. However, the lack of clarity surrounding the logistics of such a transition has sparked widespread confusion among state officials, who express concern about their preparedness to handle the additional responsibilities that may arise. At a cabinet meeting, Trump declared, "We want to move education back to the states where it belongs." Yet the specifics of how this would be executed remain murky. State lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are voicing their apprehension, stating that without a defined federal plan they are left in a precarious position. "There's no solid federal plan, so we don't even know what to plan for," remarked Connecticut State Representative Miriam Khan. This sentiment echoes across various states, highlighting a growing fear that the abrupt shift could impose overwhelming burdens on local education systems. The potential fallout from dismantling the Education Department is vast. This agency currently manages the distribution of billions of dollars in federal funding critical to schools serving low-income students and students with disabilities. Joshua Cowan, an education policy professor at Michigan State University, stressed the intricate challenges that could arise, stating, "You can't just move dollars like that without downstream impacts on individual districts. Rural communities in particular rely on the established channels of communication and funding provided by the federal government, and many lawmakers are concerned that the loss of such resources could jeopardize educational equity." While some state officials have begun to develop contingency plans, most are waiting for the federal government to clarify its intentions. "Absolutely not," replied North Carolina Democratic State Representative Julie Von Hafen when asked if her state was preparing for changes in federal education funding. The uncertainty is compounded by the overarching question of how states will finance programs that were previously supported by federal funds, such as Title I schools and special education services. The White House has been notably tight-lipped about its plans. When asked about potential timelines or specific measures related to the Education Department's future, White House spokesperson Harrison Fields stated only that Trump would explore options to empower states and restore educational freedom. Meanwhile, advocates for public education warn that any shift towards block granting federal funds could lead to disastrous consequences for vulnerable populations. Robert Kim, executive director of the nonprofit Education Law Center, remarked, "It could have profound implications for disadvantaged or at-risk populations like students with disabilities." In addition to the Education Department revamp, Trump's administration is implementing sweeping changes across the federal bureaucracy, as evidenced by plans for massive layoffs and organizational restructuring in various agencies. Notably, the Environmental Protection Agency could see staff reductions of up to 65%. This aggressive downsizing strategy, led by figures like Elon Musk, aims to streamline government operations but raises alarms about the potential loss of essential services and oversight functions. As the Trump administration continues to lay out its ambitious plans, state leaders and education advocates alike are left grappling with uncertainty. Many question whether the federal government has adequately considered the implications of such drastic changes on the educational landscape, and whether states possess the necessary resources to absorb the responsibilities being offloaded by Washington. In the coming months, as details continue to unfold, the impact of these sweeping reforms on education, particularly for the most disadvantaged students, will be closely scrutinized. The stakes are high, and the future of education policy in the United States hangs in the balance. As Trump's administration pushes forward, the implications of these policy shifts will likely resonate through classrooms and communities nationwide for years to come. In a provocative move that has reignited debates surrounding the intersection of politics and media integrity, former President Donald Trump announced via his social media platform Truth Social that he intends to pursue legal action against authors who rely on anonymous sources in their writings. This announcement, made on February 26, 2025, comes in the wake of what Trump describes as an alarming trend of fake books that he claims distort reality and misrepresent his presidency. Trump's remarks reflect a long-standing contention he has with the media's use of anonymous sources, which he argues is tantamount to fabricating stories. As a president who is being given credit for having the best opening month of any president in history, quite naturally here come the fake books and stories with the so-called anonymous or off-the-record quotes, he wrote. He indicated that such practices could potentially lead to new legislation aimed at regulating published material lacking proper sourcing. The former president specifically targeted author Michael Wolff, whose latest book, All or Nothing: How Trump Recaptured America, offers a critical take on Trump's campaign behavior. In his posts, Trump dismissed Wolff's claims of having credible sources, asserting they are made-up defamatory fiction and a big price should be paid for this blatant dishonesty. This statement underscores Trump's broader strategy of portraying himself as a victim of media bias, a narrative that has resonated with his supporters. The implications of Trump's proposed legal actions are significant. Critics warn that such lawsuits could further undermine journalistic practices and threaten the freedom of the press. The reliance on anonymous sources is a time-honored tradition in journalism, often necessary to protect whistleblowers and informants who risk personal safety by providing vital information. However, Trump's initiatives could create a chilling effect, leading to self-censorship among journalists wary of potential legal repercussions. In a parallel development, Trump also released a surreal AI-generated video showcasing a fantastical vision for Gaza, which he dubbed Trump Gaza. The video presents an idyllic beachside utopia that starkly contrasts with the current realities facing the region. It features extravagant imagery, including a golden statue of Trump and scenes of lavish celebrations, all underscored by a catchy soundtrack proclaiming "Donald's coming to set you free." This video, shared widely on social media, has been met with both intrigue and skepticism, serving as a focal point for discussions about Trump's vision for international relations and his understanding of geopolitical complexities. Critics of the video argue that it embodies a harmful and unrealistic portrayal of Gaza, reducing complex issues to simplistic and fantastical narratives. The juxtaposition of Trump's legal threats against the media and his outlandish promotional content raises questions about the future of discourse in American politics. With his supporters increasingly receptive to his unorthodox ideas, Trump's approach could reshape the landscape of political communication, potentially fostering a climate where sensationalism overshadows factual reporting. Particularly as Trump prepares for a potential return to political office in the coming years. In a bold move that could reshape the landscape of American education, President Donald Trump has announced plans to dismantle the U.S. Education Department, transferring its responsibilities to the states. At a cabinet meeting on February 26, 2025, Trump declared, "We want to move education back to the states where it belongs." This significant policy shift has raised alarms among state officials and education advocates, who express concerns over their preparedness for such an influx of responsibilities and the potential impacts on millions of students nationwide. Recent reports indicate that the White House is preparing an executive order to eliminate the Education Department, although the specifics of how this transition will occur remain murky. Critics argue that Trump's unilateral approach to abolishing a federal agency lacks clarity and congressional support, as the president cannot dissolve the department without legislative backing. Linda McMahon, Trump's nominee for Education Secretary, has acknowledged the necessity of a comprehensive plan that Congress can support, yet confusion persists among state officials who must grapple with the implications of this sweeping change. State lawmakers from both parties have expressed a striking lack of readiness in addressing the responsibilities that would accompany the dismantling of the federal agency. Connecticut State Representative Mariam Khan, a Democrat and former educator, voiced her frustration, stating, "There's no solid federal plan, so we don't even know what to plan for." Her concerns reflect a broader sentiment among state officials who feel unprepared for the potential fallout of losing federal oversight and funding. The Education Department plays a crucial role in managing federal funding for K-12 schools, including Title I programs that support low-income students and provisions for children with disabilities. In its absence, states would need to address significant funding gaps and regulatory responsibilities that they may currently lack the infrastructure to handle. Joshua Cowan, an education policy professor at Michigan State University, warned, "You can't just move dollars like that without downstream impacts on individual districts." Further complicating matters, the Trump administration has initiated mass layoffs within the federal workforce, targeting thousands of employees, particularly those in probationary roles. The Office of Personnel Management has reported that approximately 75,000 federal workers accepted deferred resignation offers, further exacerbating concerns about the government's ability to function effectively during this transitional period. Russell T. Vaught, the director of the White House Budget Office, and Charles Ezell, acting head of the Office of Personnel Management, have called for agencies to prepare for even more drastic reductions in personnel, with plans to be submitted by mid-April. Trump's endorsement of these cuts aligns with his broader strategy to dismantle what he describes as a bloated and corrupt federal bureaucracy. During a recent cabinet meeting, he expressed his full support for Elon Musk's initiatives, emphasizing a desire to streamline government operations. The memo circulating among agency leaders outlines plans for possible relocations of federal offices to reduce costs, suggesting that the Education Department could be among those facing significant changes. As the administration moves forward with its proposals, state lawmakers are grappling with the potential consequences. Some Republicans have acknowledged the difficulties in preparing for the changes, while Democrats in blue states are strategizing ways to mitigate the impact on their education systems. Vermont State Representative Mary Catherine Stone remarked on the urgency of addressing potential funding shortfalls, stating, "We're looking under every couch cushion to know where our education dollars come from." The implications of these shifts extend far beyond administrative changes. They pose a fundamental threat to federal protections for students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Advocates for public education warned that the proposed transition to block grants could lead to a diversion of funds from public schools to private institutions, undermining essential civil rights protections and educational standards. With the future of federal education policy hanging in the balance, it is clear that the Trump administration's plans will necessitate a careful balancing act between state autonomy and the need for equitable educational opportunities for all students. As state officials await guidance from Washington, the unfolding developments will be critical in shaping the trajectory of education in the United States. The stakes are high, and how leaders address these challenges will have lasting repercussions on the educational landscape for generations to come. In a significant shift in U.S. trade policy, President Donald Trump is intensifying his approach to tariffs, asserting that they are essential to protect American interests and reinvigorate domestic manufacturing. This move comes amid growing concerns about the potential ramifications for consumers and the economy at large. Trump's administration recently announced plans to impose a sweeping 25% tariff on all goods imported from the European Union, justifying the decision by claiming that the EU was established to disadvantage the United States. This follows the earlier implementation of a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports and a 10% tariff on Chinese products. Moreover, proposed tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, expected to take effect on March 4, 2025, have sparked further debate about their impact on trade relations and consumer prices. Tariffs are essentially taxes levied on imported goods intended to make foreign products more expensive and thereby encourage consumers to buy domestic alternatives. For example, a 10% tariff means that a product valued at $10 incurs an additional $1 charge. While U.S. steelmakers have welcomed these tariffs with rising stock prices, companies that rely on steel and aluminum for production have warned of impending price hikes for consumers. The rationale behind Trump's aggressive tariff strategy is multifaceted. Primarily, he claims that these measures will safeguard American jobs in manufacturing while generating revenue for the government. Trump's administration has linked tariffs to broader objectives, including efforts to curb illegal immigration and combat the influx of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid primarily sourced from China and smuggled into the U.S. through Mexico. Despite these assertions, economists express caution about the potential negative consequences of such policies. Following the announcement of new tariffs, consumer and business sentiment has begun to waver. A recent Conference Board survey indicated the largest monthly decline in consumer confidence since 2021, driven by fears of rising prices and uncertain employment prospects. Analysts predict that as firms adjust to these tariffs, the cost of goods will likely increase, thereby impacting inflation rates. The economic landscape is already showing signs of strain as Trump's administration also moves to cut federal spending and lay off government workers. Local economies are grappling with the implications of these funding freezes, forcing officials to consider tax increases or alternative revenue sources to stabilize budgets. Economists have warned that the combination of tariffs and spending cuts could lead to a significant slowdown in economic growth, with estimates suggesting that inflation could rise sharply in the coming months. The situation is further complicated by escalating trade tensions with China, Canada, and Mexico, which together accounted for over 40% of U.S. imports in 2024. China's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, including a 15% tax on coal and liquefied natural gas, have raised fears of a protracted trade war that could dampen economic prospects for both nations. As Trump's tariffs take center stage, the prospect of retaliatory measures looms large. Canada has already vowed to respond to the proposed tariffs, and Mexican officials have expressed similar sentiments. This tit-for-tat escalation raises the specter of a drawn-out trade conflict that could disrupt supply chains and lead to widespread price increases across various sectors, particularly in industries like automotive manufacturing, where parts cross borders multiple times. Looking forward, the uncertainty surrounding Trump's tariff policies and their potential fallout may lead to significant economic ramifications. Experts warn that if these measures continue, they could contribute to a wider trade war, adversely affecting inflation and consumer spending. With inflation rates expected to rise, the Federal Reserve may face mounting pressure to reconsider interest rate policies, potentially stalling any hopes for economic recovery in an already fragile post-pandemic landscape. As the administration navigates these complex trade dynamics, the path ahead remains uncertain. The effectiveness of Trump's tariff strategy in achieving its stated goals will likely be tested in the coming months, setting the stage for a pivotal chapter in U.S. economic history. In a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy, President Donald Trump has ignited controversy with his recent approach to European alliances and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. As tensions simmer, the implications of his administration's actions are drawing scrutiny from political analysts, foreign policy experts, and international leaders alike. With a backdrop of historical alliances and shifting geopolitical landscapes, Trump's decisions are shaping not only the future of U.S.-European relations but also the global balance of power. In a notable pivot, Trump has publicly criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky while refraining from labeling Russian President Vladimir Putin a dictator. This stance has raised eyebrows across the Atlantic, especially as Vice President Vance warned European leaders at the Munich Security Conference that the real threat to their security might stem from internal divisions rather than external aggression. As foreign policy experts point out, this radical alienation of U.S. allies is unlikely to yield long-term benefits for the United States. Victoria Coates, a former deputy national security advisor in Trump's first administration, defended the president's approach, arguing that post-World War II alliances such as NATO have become outdated. "A war between Germany and France is not our number one national security problem," she stated in a recent interview. Trump is acknowledging that the world has changed and the conflict at hand is the Ukraine-Russia war, which has persisted for 3 years without any meaningful diplomatic effort to resolve it. However, analysts caution that the implications of this strategy could be far-reaching. The traditional U.S. role as a leader of European allies in countering Russian aggression is being questioned. Coates highlighted that NATO countries have collectively agreed on a series of war plans, but many European allies have yet to meet their defense spending commitments. If 3 years into a war in Europe you don't have the major European economies investing sufficiently to sustain what NATO has agreed to, then I have to wonder if it's not the U.S. turning its back on NATO but these other members, she asserted. In a significant upcoming meeting, President Zelensky is expected to visit Washington to finalize a deal that may offer Ukraine critical support in the form of raw materials for essential industries such as electric vehicle batteries and cancer drugs. This deal, according to Coates, would mark a substantial commitment from the U.S. to Ukraine's security, a necessary step given the current geopolitical climate. As discussions unfold, the divergence between Trump and British leader Keir Starmer over security guarantees for Ukraine highlights the deepening divisions in Western foreign policy. With Starmer advocating for stronger commitments from NATO allies to support Ukraine, the contrasting approaches of these leaders underscore the precariousness of transatlantic relations. The upcoming weeks promise to be pivotal as the U.S. grapples with its role in a rapidly changing international landscape. The effectiveness of Trump's new strategy, the responses from European allies, and the broader implications for NATO and global security will likely shape discussions in the halls of power well beyond this administration. As the situation develops, the world watches closely, pondering the future of U.S. foreign policy and its impact on global stability. In an era of rapidly shifting geopolitical landscapes, the recent developments surrounding U.S. President Donald Trump, Ukraine, and the dynamics of international diplomacy have stirred significant debate. As the conflict in Ukraine continues to unfold, Trump's unique approach, characterized by a transactional style of diplomacy, has caught the attention of both allies and adversaries alike. Here are 4 key aspects to understand about this evolving situation. At the forefront of Trump's strategy is a proposed deal concerning Ukraine's rare earth minerals. This initiative is not merely about resource allocation, it represents a pivotal shift in how the U.S. engages with its allies during times of crisis. In the face of Russia's ongoing invasion, Trump's administration is pushing for an agreement that would grant the U.S. access to these critical minerals in exchange for financial assistance to bolster Ukraine's defenses. What better could you have for Ukraine than to be in an economic partnership with the United States, asserted Mike Waltz, U.S. National Security Advisor, framing the deal as a necessary step toward ensuring Ukraine's security amidst its dire circumstances. This transactional approach has drawn criticism, with some experts likening it to a protection racket. Virginia Page Fortna, a political scientist at Columbia University, pointed out that the demand for Ukraine's mineral wealth, while it is under siege, feels less like a partnership and more akin to extortion. Historically, the U.S. has provided military support without demanding a formal payment in return, leading analysts to question the implications of such a shift in foreign policy. Stephen A. Cook from the Council on Foreign Relations noted that while the U.S. has previously used military might to protect its economic interests, it has never explicitly demanded compensation from allies during wartime. In tandem with these negotiations, Trump's recent meetings with European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, highlight the precarious state of NATO alliances. Macron and Trump engaged in polite debates regarding the distribution of aid to Ukraine, revealing underlying tensions about defense spending among NATO allies. Starmer's visit, touted as one of the most significant of his political career, aimed at securing U.S. backing for a potential European military mission in Ukraine. However, the effectiveness of these discussions remains uncertain, especially in light of Trump's history of expressing dissatisfaction with NATO commitments. Moreover, the direct communications between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have introduced a new layer of complexity to international relations. Following a series of high-level talks in Riyadh, the possibility of peace negotiations once considered a distant hope is now being actively pursued by the U.S. This shift has alarmed Ukraine and its European allies, who fear that U.S.-Russia relations may be warming at their expense. Trump's willingness to engage with Putin diverges sharply from the traditional U.S. stance toward Russia, raising questions about the future of Western unity against Russian aggression. The repercussions of Trump's transactional diplomacy extend beyond Ukraine as it signals a broader recalibration of U.S. foreign policy. Analysts warn that this approach could diminish America's credibility on the world stage, leading allies to reconsider their reliance on U.S. support. As Joseph Nye, a political scientist at Harvard, observed, while short-term gains may be achieved through coercive diplomacy, the long-term strategic consequences could be detrimental, driving nations to seek partnerships elsewhere, particularly with countries like China. In conclusion, as Trump continues to navigate these turbulent waters, the implications of his approach to diplomacy will likely reverberate across the geopolitical landscape. With a focus on immediate gains over long-term alliances, the U.S. risks alienating traditional partners and reshaping the dynamics of international relations. Observers will be keenly watching how these developments unfold, particularly as Ukraine seeks to maintain its sovereignty in the face of ongoing threats. The coming months will be critical in determining not only the future of U.S.-Ukraine relations but also the broader implications for NATO and global stability.